And the reality between the hard and the soft is that I think actually the soft skills, they might be called soft skills, but there's nothing soft or easy about them. How can you get experience if nobody gives you the chance to acquire that experience? The reality is always shades gray. It's
Great.
never black or white. It's not one or zero.
Even
I don't think it goes away. I think it becomes less of a struggle as you become just a bit more in the know. So I think to some extent having that imposter syndrome, by the way, it's a healthy thing because
mm,
it helps you push yourself a bit more and learn something new, right? And not be complacent in your job. Never put yourself in a situation where you don't know the subject because that's going to be difficult. You're not going to be able to lie. People will feel that,
mm.
people will find out, and they will spot you if you do that.
Hi, Radu. Thank you so much for coming back. And today's topic is about the skills. And would like to get your advice and wisdom and reflection from your experience on the types of skills at different levels and what would be your suggestions on how a person can develop their skills as they master their craft of UX and what skills to concentrate. So before we dive deep into the podcast, why don't you introduce yourself again?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Hi, folks. I'm Radu. I am a UX designer, UX strategist, and I've been working in the design space for about 15 years or so. And of course, along the 15 years I have, I probably acquired quite a lot of skills, not many directly related to UX, but some of them quite beneficial and they do help me quite a lot. So hopefully we get to cover everything in more detail.
So you said as you progressed in your career, you also acquired extra skills in UX. But tell us about you started your career 15 years back, I'm assuming in UX. So when you started, like just from reflecting back, what skills, like let's say it's very broad, technical or soft skills, what skills did you think got your first job?
First of all, I think in terms of skills, the way you divide the skills, usually you tend to look at the hard skills, which is
Mm,
probably more the tools you use and the specific processes that you apply. And then you have the soft skills. And the soft skills are how you present yourself, how you work with other people, how you lead meetings, how you conduct yourself in interviews, and things that might be less software, but more human kind of interactions and behaviors. And the reality between the hard and the soft is that I think actually the soft skills, they might be called soft skills, but there's nothing soft or easy about them. They're very hard to master. And I don't think I've achieved that level where I'm happy with my soft skills just yet. So we're probably going to look at what do you need to get your job? What do you need to get into X? And to be honest, you always have to have a mix. Quite early
mm,
on, I didn't realize how important soft skills are. Back then, probably I was not even sure what soft skills actually mean, like emotional intelligence and stuff like that. I was probably not paying attention. I was too focused on the craft, the creation of items, the process, and I was very process driven as well. So, in terms of getting that first job, it was all to do with showcasing the skills I had through a portfolio, right? And the portfolio will always focus on what was the output, what was the outcome, how did you do it, how long it took, how beautiful is it, right? There's still that element of is it well presented? Can you articulate it? What was your added value? How did you measure it? Success and so on. So I think I did struggle for a bit there, and probably that's why it took me so long from the transition of graduate and getting an internship and then finding a full time position. And for me, in
mm.
my case, it was about 9 months in between where I really struggled and I really applied and were every day applying for 20, 30, 50 jobs, whatever the number was, without getting responses. And that was probably by the time the iPhone was launched, right? The first iPhone. So it's a while back. But just to go back to your point, what kind of skills do you need to get that first job? You need to focus on having a portfolio that really stands out, really speaks for itself. Right now, the market is very competitive. So, unless you have a very good portfolio that you can really put out there and can do the work for you to get you those interviews, you will struggle. So everything you can do, I wouldn't even focus so much on the kind of things that you want to do. I would focus so much on real business cases. Stay away if you
Mm.
can from fictitious case studies that might not be grounded in reality. Stay away from just simple redesigns where you go and you pick an item, a menu, or something from a popular website and you redesign it. Like, try and stay away from that if you can. Of course, it's
Mm.
easier said than done because at the end of the day, how can you get the experience if nobody gives you the chance to acquire that experience? But the reality is you might have friends with businesses. You might know people in different companies. You might already work in a job. So we're going back to the same point. How can you apply the things you know to get the portfolio or the case studies you want, right? And the hard skills or the soft skills will depend on the project, will depend on where you are and the type of job you want to get. So if you want to get a UX job, that's a bit more focused on, let's say, the visualizing of the different elements, then focus on hard skills like prototyping or wireframing
Mm.
or visualizing or UI even, and design systems as well. That could be another one that you can emphasize. And those can be showcased through screenshots and prototypes and videos and so on. But then at the same time, you also need to have some soft skills, even if it's just a bare minimum. You need to know how to position that, right? So approach your portfolio where you showcase your work the same way as you would approach any project. So try and think about who's the end user, who's going to consume your
Mm.
portfolio or your case study. If it's a recruitment professional, they probably only have 15 seconds to make a decision or less than a minute. So, what can you give them up front for them to realize, yes, that's the person I want to interview, or I want this person to progress? And if you think of the next user who's in that sequence, hiring manager, they probably want to see more process driven. They want to understand what was your biggest struggle. What's the story you had behind? What did you learn? How did the client or who's the person that you added value to through that project? How did they react? What did they say? Do you have any testimonials? So try and approach it that way, right? And I would say still focus on learning the craft and learning the skills that need you to get to that point, but then take it further. Think about how can you push it? What other value can you get? Or try and get feedback. Again, we're going back to the same points. Get the feedback from colleagues, from people that know you, people that don't know you, people that, might want to hire you. Try and get that feedback early and say, hey, if I show you this case study, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And
Mm.
gather that feedback. So that's probably a long way around of saying you need everything at the same time, which I know it doesn't help, but you have to get there. You have to push yourself as much as you can.
So let's break it down. The end of the day, if you're trying to get a job in UX, whether you're experienced or transitioning or a graduate, you need portfolio. So one thing, let's divide the skills in such a way 80-20 rule, hard skills and soft skills. Someone just entering, graduate or transition, they can't master the design systems or those stuff. Which part of the technical skill is it like a basic understanding of double time and ability to apply it in the real life projects, your friend's website or mom and pop shops, like real life business metrics or something like that? For them, it would be 80% technical skills, 20% soft skills because they're just starting out. They have to know UX in order to get very good at soft skills. They have to know what they're presenting. So for them, which hard skill 80% they have to concentrate on? Like very beginner, don't know anything.
Yeah.
Which would you recommend?
Okay. I think the best way to start, right, is to make sure, first of all, you understand at least the main components of the UX process. So you have to understand
Mm.
the user centric component and then you have to understand the business component. So those are two things that they might not be soft skills because they require a bit of business knowledge and then a bit of user knowledge. So, a bit of psychology. Those are basic level components. You need to make sure you understand that the two items go hand in hand. You cannot have user centricity and you cannot have business focus or business value standing on their own separate corners. You need them together. So my point here is that you have to transcend beyond just methods and tools. You have to understand those two and how they work together, right? So you
Mm.
need to understand that there's a way to define the goals of a business, and then to try and find out what the goals of the user are, and then try and find that match, try and find that overlap between the two. And then from then on, then you can apply the different skills that you have learned thus far. And it could be prototyping, it could be wireframing, it could be design thinking, like you said, the double diamond, it
Mm.
could be finding solutions, right? It could be the Kano model if you want to be really specific when it comes to defining what's the minimum added value that you can add before the product is not useful anymore. Those are the processes and the methodologies you also need to understand. There's a very high chance that somebody in an interview will ask you about the agile process and how familiar you are
Mm.
with agile. So agile, you could debate what is agile. Is it, is it hard skill? Is it soft skill? Is it what? It's probably a mix. It's an in between. But overall, the process itself and a good understanding of what agile is and how it works in currently in business and how is it applied. It's a very kind of step by step process. So you need to show a good understanding of that. And if you can show some experience, that's perfect. But if you can't, just be aware that when somebody throws a term at you, you need to understand the terminology, right? So do
Mm.
spend time with other people that might be working already in the field and get used to how they're calling things. And if you're not sure what the specific thing is, go and ask or search or fill that knowledge gap straight away. That's probably more on the soft side, paying attention, picking up keywords, and then do your research to make sure you understand the language. So that's the focus should always be on understanding the basics, understand that
Mhm.
the business and the user, they're never separate, they always go together. And then the second one is make sure you understand the words, the terminology, the jargon that's being used in the industry. And that will help you. It will help you immensely as you work on your process and as you refine the different things. So it's hard to be specific because it really depends on the type of job. Like you said,
Mm.
some jobs might require more of the UI or the organizational skills, like design systems, and some of them might require a bit more of the research, the kind of the quantitative or the qualitative. So it's very hard to just pinpoint and say, if you would only learn one thing, learn this. I'm not a big fan of articles that
Mhm.
you find online with advice like that because it's very black and white, and the reality is always shades gray. It's
Great.
never black or white. It's not one or zero.
Even you're mentioning about the agile skill, that's at the same time that's a hard technical skill, at the same time it's a soft skill. I think, is it safe to say UX, there is not, like for software development we can say coding is a hard skill, I can say that your presentation is a soft skill, whereas in UX, can I safely say, as you gave the agile skill, understanding the basics or those stuff, can I safely say in UX there is no 100% soft skills, is a gray area, like every skill you take from prototyping to how you present it, and at the same time, do you know how to prototype, do you know how to apply the UI principles? So is it safe to say there is no 80-20 rule? Maybe it may fluctuate within the skill, but all the skills in UX are mostly gray.
Yeah.
Can we say that
Yeah,
safely?
there's definitely a mix, and not everything is as clearly defined as in maybe in other jobs or roles.
Mm.
I think like you said, there's a bit of a blur in between the different sides, and there is a mix. It's safe to say that.
So, coming back, you mentioned it's really hard to pinpoint the skills, right? If someone is starting, know all the basics. But UX is such a vast subject. It's like a university degree. You learn so much, like a school, nothing is so much useful. I know, like, current, if you want to example, if you're going to software development industry, can we say this is the specific vocabulary in it if you want to, because UX is not only like software, it can be like a hardcore, like pharma medical, like in pharmacy there won't be any agile process, I'm assuming, if they're like hardcore medical devices and those stuff. Whereas if it's a software company or working as a UX designer, there were certain theories you need to know agile, which is very important. Would you think they have to start, because it's such a vast vocabulary they have to know and vast terminology and processes? Which one would be the safe bet to start with to lay the foundation? Because as you progress, you have to keep upgrading yourself. There may be new Scrum, Kanban, like so many things keep coming. You said like they have to know the basic terminology. What do you think they have to start? Like when you said basic, what is the basic?
Yeah, there is a minimum requirement. And I
Mm-hmm.
think for every entry level job or junior UX position or product position, there is a very minimum required. And of course, the minimum might be a range depending on the different companies. But at the very minimum, you need to understand how to use Figma. And I
Okay.
think Figma, in some cases, I had this conversation with quite a few people. Figma is not just a UI tool. Figma is much more than that, right? It can help you organize your thoughts. It can help you explain a concept. It can help you create a diagram that you can really easily mock up and then create into a quick clickable wireframe. That's also a prototype, right? So Figma is a really basic tool at the moment that you need to know. And that was probably the case with Sketch before that, or Adobe XD, or even Photoshop or Dreamweaver, maybe to some extent. You still had to know a bit. But right now, Figma has made everything so much easier that I don't think any of us have an excuse to say, "Oh no, I'm not gonna use Figma." So Figma and the equivalent whiteboarding tool FigJam,
Mm.
they're an absolute must for workshops, for bringing people in the same place, for trying to explain what's in your head and how you see a specific piece interacting or moving or what's a specific flow. You need to understand how to make some connections. And I think the good news is anybody listening is afraid of interacting with Figma or has been somehow held back on jumping in, I think you should because it's actually a lot easier than you think. It's just they've done such a good job at building on everything that was done before and then just creating, simplifying that to a level where anybody could come in and do something within the first hour. That's a minimum. I would say if I meet somebody that tells me, oh, I don't work in Figma, I'll be very taken aback and I
Mm.
wouldn't be sure why and how come. So I would say that's probably make sure you have that. Make sure you understand the very basics. Make sure you understand how to create some connections in Figma and how to create pages and how to structure elements and you understand how to group them and so on. Nothing too advanced, but have the basics done because there's no way you can have a portfolio in UX or product without having some kind of Figma helping you explain what you want to do.
So basically, apart from knowing the vocabulary, what is a prototype, what is whatever field you want to do your research on the industry, what terminology they're using. But it's not only like talking the talk, but you have to also walk the talk. There is no excuse. Learn Figma because that's the most used tool. That's the safe bet if you're trying to. There is no excuse. Hey, I can do a workshop, but I don't know how to use like FigJam or like Myrobot. Those are the most famous. Know that. And let's say you got the job and you're progressing, and because depending upon your role, you've been there, say, 5, 6 years in your career, and you're at the point you're deciding, shall I go into management or shall I go into technical, like fully technical? But between that point, people also struggle when they're deciding, okay, if I go into technical, can I cover it up if they're not strong with technical skills, but they want to go principal? But if someone wants to go to management, they may say, oh my God, I'm not good with soft skills. I don't know how to communicate. I just pulled it out. The feeling you get, I hope they didn't see my mistake, the imposter syndrome. I'm assuming you've been 15 years in the industry. You did touch on you struggled with soft skills. And I'm thinking it's an imposter syndrome. How did you manage it? Because I just want to break the myth. It's common, everyone, even outside of UX, because UX is gray area. You can't say I mastered the skill. Because, example, if I'm prototyping, I wish, oh my God, someone didn't see that small glitch, like technically strong. Like, still at the end of the day, you may feel like an imposter. Like, how to manage that feeling of feeling imposter and still push your career through
Yeah.
and develop your skills.
Yeah, just on the imposter syndrome from my experience, I don't think it goes away. I think it becomes less of a struggle as you
Yeah.
become just a bit more in the know and you've been experiencing maybe different situations and different projects and you've acquired a lot of skills on both hard and soft skills. But in terms of imposter syndrome, I've met and I had conversations with people that have been doing this for a lot longer than I have, and it's the team is quite common. Is it's always there. You almost always expect to go into a meeting or go into a room or onto a stage, and for people to just say, "Hey, you don't belong there." What you almost, and it doesn't matter the level. Even if I would say, just to name drop a bit, Jared Spool. I was in a workshop with him and we were discussing this topic. And he was saying the same thing. He was saying, I'm just another guy. I don't know why people think I'm this thing. And they're always like, oh, Jared Spool, he's the best. I'm not. I'm really making this stuff up as I go. He was always a version of that imposter syndrome. And he was saying that, yeah, I don't see what the fuss is. And it's like, what do you mean? Is you're one of the smartest people in UX? You've been doing this for a long time. You have your own business. And still he was like, no, it's not true. So it just, I think you have to get used to it and you have to maybe learn how to manage it. You have to learn how to dial the volume back and be aware of that. I think to some extent, having that imposter syndrome, by the way, it's a healthy thing because
Mm.
it helps you push yourself a bit more and learn something new, right? And not be complacent in your job. So I think to some extent there's a nice symbiosis or just a nice balance between that, but it might be different for different people. So obviously it's a very kind of internal thing, right, of our internal
Oh,
operating system.
yeah. So before I move on to the last question, I'm really curious. You said as you experience, you're able to manage the imposter syndrome. What's your technique for managing? Give us a tip, please.
The best tip I can give you here is to make sure you absolutely own or fully understand the subject at hand. So if you
Mm.
want to have a conversation with somebody about information architecture or how information architecture overlaps with SEO, make sure you have done your homework. Make sure you have read 3 or 4 books and 100 articles and you have created some notes and you can really stand up to a conversation with an expert in that field, right? And for me, if I go into a conversation or presentation, a meeting, a workshop, and I know my subject and I'm confident, I can deal with anything that's being thrown at me and improvise if I have to as we go. Never put yourself in a situation where you don't know the subject because that's going to be difficult. You're not going to be able to lie. People will feel that,
Mm.
people will find out, and they will spot you if you do that. Own your subject, no matter what that subject is. If it's prototyping or wireframing or UI or research, make sure that specific thing that you're doing that very moment, you as much as you can about that subject.
So basically, your tip in how you manage and your practical tip is do your homework. Make sure you expect like it's like a overthinking, which I do. I did a lot of book before I jump into. So maybe that may help. That's one of the tool you can use. Be prepared. Don't overthink like I do overthinking a lot. Don't over prepare, but still make sure you covered all your bases. So if anything is thrown at you, then you don't because without you knowing the subject, then if you come out, then it would really get you a bad reputation. So apart from imposter internal struggle.
Yeah.
So know your subject before you
I
talk.
think just on that, I think don't be afraid to that point. Don't be afraid that something bad will happen because that's also you're falling into the other extreme. So
Yeah.
the whole thing is just be balanced. Know as much as you can about the subject. It doesn't mean you need to know
You need
everything.
to be an expert.
Just know as much
Yeah.
as you can. At that point in time, as much as you can, do your homework and make sure you're prepared. And don't worry if something doesn't go your way or if something happens, things don't really linger around for too long. People forget. I would say what you think is your biggest failure and you ask other people, they probably don't even remember that it happened, right? And so in most cases, don't overthinking.
Don't beat up yourselves. Yeah. I think that's the blessing of modern world attention span. People just forget the next second until you that's another topic. But coming to our last question, Radu, how do someone did a reflection and they were a bit confused with the imposter. Example, they want to go to, like, there were two splits, right? As you go senior, do you want to go into management or do you want to become a principal or specialist? So, with the skill set, how do someone actually make the right choice? Apart from you needing what you want, how do you know based on your skill stack? How do you reflect?
I think, again, we're going back to that point where you will probably have some say in your career path, but that
Mm,
will also depend on the opportunities you have available as you go. So you might be in a company, you might not really like management, but is really
mm,
well paid. And there's an opportunity for you to move from a senior role. So maybe you've been with that company for a while. There's an opening, they trust you, and they think you could do a good job, right? If that happens, maybe you're not 100% sold, but you're going to take the job anyway because it's a pay bump and you're going to do it. And you might do it for a while and maybe you get to love it as you go, or maybe you just
mm,
realize you don't. But I would say just use whatever opportunities you have available to learn about yourself. So there'll never be a decision like a fork in the road where you have to decide if you go left or right. Things, in my experience, they're not as clean cut. Sometimes things happen and shortcuts come your way, and sometimes you have to take the long way around, and you're not gonna find that short road, right, that will take you to where you want
mm.
to. So still have an idea of, do you want to be more principal, or do you want to be more in charge of people and help people explore and push teams to be the best that they can be, right? So that's also a skill in itself, right? You will know if that's the right thing for you. If it scares you, maybe that's why you should do it, because it scares you. You're never going to find out if you love it or not unless you do it, right? So
Mm.
I think you have to be aware of that balance. Also be aware that the two paths, the principal and the managing, they're not the only paths, right? So do
Mm.
look for what else. Maybe your future doesn't lie in the corporate world. Maybe it's not a big company. Maybe it's your own company. Maybe it's a consultancy. Maybe it's just a project, a side project with a few friends. Maybe it's something you truly believe in and you create a business out of that. So they're not the only two paths. There's plenty of options. And I think you just have to be open. But do explore and don't be afraid. Just go for it and see if it feels right or not.
So, the only way to figure out the right career path is not set in stone. There may be different variations, just to conclude. So, basically, the suggestion is have an experiment mindset. If you find an opportunity, if you're not sure, just if you, because opportunities are very rare to come by, give it a try, see, and you can always backtrack. There's always option to, like, try a different thing. Nothing is set in stone. It's a very good thing. So, what are the key takeaways, rather, from all this conversation would have? What would be your key suggestions or insights you want to give to people?
Yeah. Just to summarize everything we just discussed, I think the sooner you can become aware of the two types of skills, hard skills and soft skills, and clearly define which is which, right? And understand that
Mm.
there's also an in between, that will probably help you just be a bit more focused and maybe a bit more targeted in terms of what you're chasing. What is it that you want to go for? Being more aware of that distribution is quite good. Also be aware that soft skills, they're very loosely defined and they're also very hard to acquire. It takes probably in some cases years to get to be very good at, I don't know, empathy, for example, in interviews,
Mm.
or a specific way of conducting an interview. That's a soft skill, but you get there. So don't be too concerned about when you're starting out. Don't be too concerned that you're not mastering different things. Just be aware of them, and then try and combine them in a way that's unique to you and that reflects quite clearly in your case study. And it tells the story of who you are and how you approach a project. So I think those two are very important to know quite early. The other one, on the hard skills side, make sure you learn Figma. I'm not sure in 3, 4 years from now, maybe we won't have Figma, we will have something else. But for now, Figma is an industry standard and you absolutely must know that. I would even go as far as being a project manager. I would encourage you to understand how to use FigJam and Figma because it'll be so beneficial for you interacting with everybody else. So that's the second point, right? Just make sure you understand that. And then As you progress, you will realize that you always feel like somebody will discover you. You always feel like you'll be discovered, and people will point at you and say, "Hey, what? Why you're not an expert? Leave the room." But that's probably just an internal critic, maybe your internal critic that's a bit too loud. So maybe you have to learn how to live with it and maybe just dial down the volume a bit and just be aware that it's actually you could use it to your advantage, right? By using that small voice in your head to learn new things, right? And to become an absolute owner of your domain or your subject. And then the other point is to make sure you're prepared. Don't walk into conversations and pretend you know the subject. If you don't know the subject, in some cases, maybe that's the right thing to say. Just say, I'm not familiar with that, but I can look into it and I can get back to you. But in most cases, I would say try and be prepared. Own the subject that you're going to engage with or have that conversation about. So make sure you don't improvise. That's a hard soft skill to improvise. Yeah, so that's basically on the imposter syndrome. And then just the very last thing is just be aware that there's quite a few options, right, for you to progress. But I wouldn't worry too much about it because again, progression and career progression changes as you go. You when you start out, you might want some things and then 10 years later those things are not even an item anymore because you've grown past that point and you actually want something completely different. So just be aware that things change. Have a loose plan and follow it, but make the most use of the opportunities you have around you. And even create your own opportunities if you feel stuck or you feel like maybe you don't have an option. Just look outside the box, look for feedback, have conversations with people, and see what happens.
Perfect. I think we can dig into more in like next episodes like imposter, but that's like a very effective like I think in this podcast we had so many impactful messages. Maybe we can dig deeper into next seasons or something. But yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.